Hey, it's Christy Schaefer, and I just got done on the treadmill. I was super inspired to do a video like right now, so we're gonna go ahead and jump into it. I got to fly the Warrior today with my favorite person, so I'm pretty happy. But while we were in the hangar, we actually ran into a friend of mine who saw my first vlog and had some really interesting questions that inspired me to make this video today. By the way, I've had a lot of response so far, overwhelmingly positive. So definitely keep the comments and questions coming, you guys. Most of them have actually been in my inbox, stuff that people have sent me privately, which is totally fine as well. In fact, one of those messages came from a friend of mine who said that she really wants to do keto, but she's afraid because she has high cholesterol. So we're going to talk about that today. As a society, we've been told that high cholesterol equals a higher risk of cardiovascular health like heart attacks, heart disease, etc. But that really frustrates me because that has been proven over and over and over again to be false. It's called the lipid hypothesis, and this thing has permeated our medical community across the world for the last 70 years. It's old, antiquated information that's been proven to be untrue. So today, let's break it down. We're going to jump right into it. When I was in school, I learned that cholesterol is super important to our metabolic health. It's incredibly important to every single cell in our body. In fact, cholesterol is the backbone molecule for every single hormone in your body. So things like testosterone and estrogen, those things that you can't live without, they're made up of cholesterols. Cholesterol actually makes up about 30% of every single cell in your body. So if you look at the cellular membrane, you're going to see a whole lot of cholesterols in there, and they're used for transportation, and they make the cellular membrane very fluid, which is what you want. So my question is, from a metabolic standpoint, why do we want to lower our cholesterol levels? One person told me, well, it's the kind of cholesterol. And you know what? To some level, he's correct, but not in the way that he thought he was correct. The conventional wisdom is HDL is good cholesterol, LDL is bad cholesterol, and VLDL is really bad cholesterol, but that's all wrong. Let's talk about what the HDL, LDL, VLDL, what even are those? So for example, HDL is high density lipoprotein. Lipoproteins are carrier molecules. They actually carry the cholesterols around your body to the cells and whatnot that they're needed. So when we measure our cholesterol, we're not even measuring the actual cholesterol. We're measuring the high density lipoprotein. We're measuring those carrier molecules. So we've got the HDLs, the LDLs, the VLDLs. Well, have you heard of IDL? Those are intermediate density lipoproteins. They're not even measured in our blood work. In fact, we have something like 12 or 13 different types of lipoproteins, but we're at best getting 2, maybe 3 of those measured out. Also, let's talk about the bad cholesterols that we're always being told about, those LDLs and VLDLs. Did you know that LDLs are really only bad when they are glycated? Glycated means that you have so much free floating glucose in your blood that it starts attaching to the cells. In fact, that's why we measure hemoglobin A1C. For those of you that have come back with high glucose numbers and you've had your A1C measured, that's what they're measuring. They're measuring how glycated your cells are. So we take those LDLs and we measure them. We measure to see how glycated they are. And that is a better marker of metabolic heart health. In fact, if you take that in conjunction with your triglycerides, now you've got a really good picture. The problem is that we don't measure glycated LDLs. We're literally just told this is what your HDL is, this is what your LDL is. And if our LDLs are too high or our ratios are off, oftentimes doctors will prescribe statins and send you on your way. I think that's wrong. In fact, I don't want to give anybody medical advice, and I do implore you to ask questions of your healthcare provider, but I personally wouldn't just take a statin on the word of my primary care physician and run. especially knowing what statins do. Statins lower your cholesterol, which means that they're now lowering all of those backbones for your hormones. Did you know that guys who often take statins also wind up having to take medications like Viagra or get testosterone therapy and whatnot? It's this crazy cycle. We think we have a problem, we get prescribed medication for it, and it causes all these other issues. The list of problems that statins causes is so great. I don't even think it's worth it, all because we're afraid of cholesterol. So let's go back to the cholesterol. But they clog your arteries. Do they? I would ask, from a metabolic standpoint, how does cholesterol clog your arteries? Okay, your arteries are lined with small epithelial cells. That's the lining of the artery wall. What happens is they get inflamed and cause microtearing inside the arterial walls. Those LDLs, they do what they're supposed to do. They get in there and they plug it up, because having tears in your arteries, which can eventually lead to an aneurysm, it's a bad thing. It's just like the plasma in your blood. Your plasma is free floating. If we get a cut on our arms, the plasma goes in there, patches it up, boom, we get a scab. The plaque that forms inside your arterial walls is basically like an internal scab. When we get cut and get a scab, we don't blame the plasma. We don't jump to take medications to lower our plasma or, God forbid, lower our blood cell count. We blame the thing that caused the cut. That's what we need to do when we look at those microtears inside our arteries. What caused those microtears? Inflammation. What caused the inflammation? I mean, we wouldn't blame firemen for a fire, would we? And that's what those LDLs are doing. They're getting in there like the good little lipoproteins they are to put out a potential fire that they see with those microtears. But what happens over time is those LDLs start building up to form scabs or plaques along the arterial walls. And that's what winds up causing the clogs in your arteries. But we need to take a closer look at what's actually causing the inflammation to begin with. So what is causing the inflammation that's leading to the microtears? Yep, you guessed it, glycated cells. The glycated cells cause all sorts of inflammatory mediators to come in, and that's what causes the inflammation, which stretches and microtears the arteries. At least that's the running hypothesis. Glycated cells inflame us at the cellular level and then go from there. It causes all sorts of issues, not just on your arteries, but all over your body, including your organs. Do you see why triglycerides and hemoglobin A1C are a better measure for your health now? But because of old, antiquated medical knowledge that runs rampant through our system, we have doctors out there that take hand-me-down knowledge that they were taught, that their mentors were taught, that their mentors were taught, and prescribe statins and send you on your way. So how did we get here? Where did that old, antiquated information come from? Well, we have to go back to the 1950s, to a time when the United States was coming out of a war and we were getting all of these industrial advancements, especially in food. And the United States was going into a frenzy because their beloved president, Dwight D. Eisenhower, had just had a heart attack. One scientist in particular, Ansel Keys, was one of the individuals that was hell-bent on finding out what happened. Why did Eisenhower have this heart attack? And so he came up with a hypothesis. He called it the lipid hypothesis, in where fats and meats caused heart attacks because Eisenhower ate fats and meats. The problem is that Eisenhower also smoked like 4 packs of cigarettes a day. Oh, and by the way, his cholesterol was somewhere in the 165 range, so it really wasn't even that high. But, don't let a pesky thing like data or evidence get in the way. Take your hypothesis and run with it, which is exactly what Ansel Keys did. So Ansel Keys set out to prove his hypothesis. He designed an epidemiological study. And if you know anything about science, you'll know that an epidemiological study is a correlative study, which is typically very weak and shows almost no causation. For example, here are some correlation studies that I found as examples. All right, here's one that shows the per capita consumption of mozzarella cheese correlated with civil engineering doctorates awarded. I think my favorite one is number of people who drown by falling into a swimming pool correlates with the number of films Nicolas Cage appeared in. I don't think we need any medications to reduce Nicolas Cage, but that's just me. So Ansel Keys does this correlation study. He calls it the 7 country study because he was able to take 7 countries and put it on a plot. And it shows beautifully the more fat that is consumed, the higher amount of heart attacks and heart disease there is. And ever since then, it's pretty much what most nutritional studies have basically gone back on. That's the root of all these nutritional studies. You eat fat, you die of a heart attack. It's fairly simple. Ansel Keys got a lot of press for this. He was actually featured on Time magazine's cover. He was the squeaky wheel that definitely got the grease. He was very boisterous and loud in the scientific community. He would often bully or shut down opposing scientists' views. He actually wasn't that nice of a person. His opinion in his mind reigned supreme. The problem is that Ansel Keys was a freaking liar. It turns out that he had like 22 countries in this study, and he just decided to leave out 15 of those countries because those countries didn't correlate with his hypothesis. That's really bad science. I mean, Ansel Keys was a bad scientist in that aspect. And any scientist out there that does that just leaves out data, they're bad scientists. There was another study that was done, I think it was like in Minnesota, and they did it in a mental institution. And they literally sat on their data for like 15 years. They did vegetable oils versus meat fat, saturated fats. And when they came out with the findings like 15 years after the fact, it turns out that there was no more heart attacks in the saturated fat group. And when asked, the lead scientist said there was nothing wrong with the study. The study was done really well. They were just so darned disappointed in the findings. So they were actually out to prove their own hypothesis. And you guys, that's bad science. You don't do that. You still report the data. You're supposed to report all the findings, even if it doesn't conclude with your personal hypothesis. And unfortunately, that's what Ansel Keys did. He allowed his own personal value system to get in the way of good science. But unfortunately, at that point, the damage was done. He was one of the worst offenders of this practice. And because of that, he effectively set our country on this chain of events that led to our current obesity epidemic, because all of the nutrition guidelines and things that came out of it have led to reduce fat, increase carbs, increase vegetable oils, reduce, the saturated fats. And now we've got this crazy out of control obesity epidemic like we've never seen before. That's what happens sometimes when people get their own ideas in their heads and they can't let it go. And it's even worse with some of these individuals that have these degrees to back up their claims. People like Ansel Keys that had a PhD and they just ran with it. It's a principle called the vision of the anointed. I'll probably talk about that more in future videos, but just know that even though these so-called experts had these fancy degrees and everything else, they weren't the end all be all because they turned out to be so wrong. Oh, and by the way, most of our current nutritional studies are done with correlative studies. You know how they do these studies? They don't put people into a room and say, here, eat this for the next however long, and we're going to collect the science on it. Usually they take these subjects, enroll them in these studies, and then give them surveys. They literally sit these people down and say, how many servings of meat did you have in the last 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? They draw their blood, they check what their levels are, and then they publish it. So if they're set out to prove something, they want to collect all the data they can to prove it, right? So I know one of the studies that came out over the last few years was the consumption of red meat increases your risk of certain cancers or certain heart disease. What they did was they gave a group of people a survey and said, how many servings of red meat have you had in X amount of time? What they didn't do was put it together with, okay, so you ate hamburgers, but you also ate French fries and chips and the bun with it. Or how many servings of ice cream or cookies are you eating with it? All they did was ask the people, how many servings of meat did you have within a certain specified amount of time? And then they drew their blood, and if their blood work was terrible, then they just correlated it with that. And that's bad science. It's ridiculous that these types of studies are passed off as science because it's not really science at all. Now that we can stop being afraid of cholesterol, let's talk about what I personally eat. So last night we made cheeseburgers with 80/20 meat and full fat cheese. I put on my burger, I put sugar-free ketchup and an avocado oil mayo. I don't use the typical like regular mayo from the store because they're basically just a jar of soybean oil, which we'll talk about later. I eat a lot of full fat things. I eat full fat cheeses, full fat cream cheese, full fat meats. I really don't eat a lot of lean meats. I eat meats like ribeyes. Oh my gosh, ribeyes are my favorite. I eat a lot of like sausage and bacon. Tonight, we're actually making chicken wings in the air fryer with butter and salt. Eggs. Eggs are a staple in the Schaefer household. We eat so many eggs. My personal opinion is that eggs are like the perfect food. So you're probably going to be seeing a lot of egg dishes in future videos, but I've gotten really creative with them and it's so easy. But I absolutely avoid carbs and I try to avoid vegetable oils as much as possible. And when I say vegetable oils, I mean soybean, canola, safflower, all those. I will eat avocado oils, but I prefer to stick to saturated animal fats. And I'm going to get into why in a future video, but just know that's what I eat. And I'll actually do another video coming up showing what I prepare for work. I'm actually getting ready to go on another 4-day trip and I pack everything. I really don't eat out. So everything I have is super easy to prepare, super easy to prepare and eat in the hotel rooms. And you guys are gonna get a real good glimpse at that. I know a lot of this information is a very basic overview of the science in my brain, but I really do hope it helps you to understand. Thanks for following me along this journey as I get healthier. And now it's time to go eat.